Hello and welcome to our office webinar series and the session today on diversity without inclusion. First, before we get started, let's make sure that you are familiar with the webinar tool. So let us talk about what you can do. This is an interactive webinar. So we'd like you to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions, and also to just have some comments. And also the session is being recorded, so will be available after the webinar on our events page. I'm Sonias. I started my career as a NASA engineer and later was an executive at Fortune 500 companies, where one of my other duties as assigned was to lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I must admit, I had limited success compared to the effort we put in, which is why I started our office, where we have pioneered really the only end-to-end solution for DEI. We call it DEI as a service. We built it for the hundreds of thousands of small and medium businesses who want a more inclusive workplace to attract and retain talent and don't know exactly how to go about it, or maybe are too busy or don't have the resources. We provide the professional expertise, a proven process, and the software platform, what we call, the 3 Ps, all in one affordable subscription-based package. I also sit on public company boards where DEI is certainly a hot topic these days, and so I have many intersections with DEI. But enough about me. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Dr. Ed Hassan, CEO of Kaizen Human Capital. He's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and subject matter expert for SHRM. Ed refers to his area of expertise as IDE, with I for inclusion, before diversity and equity. He's also writing about this subject in his upcoming book entitled, which is going to be published internationally in 2022. And I'm not sure about the title yet, Ed, so maybe you'll tell us what the title is going to be. So welcome again, Ed, and it's really good to have you here and to have this conversation. You are muted, I think. I can't hear you.
Yep. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure having a chat with you, Sonia. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your journey. Tell us how you got to where you are, going back to the early days, your PhD, which was on a related topic, and how you started Kaizen, your firm, and anything else that you'd like to share so that we all get to know you better.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm actually a first-generation Palestinian American, and I'm also a practicing Muslim. My parents immigrated from Palestine in hopes for greater opportunity and really to raise their kids and to be successful and happy. Obviously, a difficult situation. I much later attended USC to complete my doctorate in education. So if there are any Trojans out there, fight on. USC is absolutely the best. But my dissertation, and we'll get into this a little bit later, was actually addressing or evaluating religious discrimination in the workplace towards Muslim women who wear the headscarf. So that was a very important topic to me. And actually, that'll be a good segue to the book a little bit later as well. For Kaizen, for me, it's really a mission-based or value-based organizational development and change firm. We really want to figure out how to unlock the potential of the employees across the board and really get them to partner with the leadership team or the company as a whole in order to be happy, successful, and ultimately create an inclusive work environment.
Well, that's awesome. Well, these days it's so important. So many organizations are working hard really on building a more diverse workplace. But then they're disappointed sometimes only to experience, some retention and engagement issues. This actually was my personal experience. I think you and I have talked about this. We had some early success in hiring people from different backgrounds and underrepresented communities, but then only later on found out that we couldn't keep them or we couldn't keep them happy. So, to the point that you and I have discussed, diversity doesn't automatically lead to more inclusion. And it's certainly not sustainable without inclusion. So when you look, at where we are today, when you look back at 2019 and, where we are today, what do you see that are different? What do you see that is, from the perspective of employees, employers, and other key stakeholders? Are we getting better at diversity? Are we getting better at inclusion? Are we getting better at one but not the other? How do you see that difference even? A little bit more maybe for those who may be wondering, how could you have diversity but not inclusion?
Yeah, so certainly there's been a huge paradigm shift. And really what we've learned in the past 3 to 4 years is that employees and people in general are not going to wait for the government to force organizations to change. And they're not going to wait for the organizations to change themselves. So the employees are stepping up. And you're seeing that with the Great Resignation, for example. You're seeing that with McDonald's now all of a sudden covering tuition or giving more PTO. So I think if anything, people have a voice mainly due to social media. And employees can now speak up, stand up and say, you know what, if you're not going to have an inclusive environment, if you're not going to let me be me and welcome me, then I don't want to be there anymore. I don't think that's going to change. I think we're going to continue to build on that. So I don't think we're quite at the level of where we need to be with inclusion, obviously, but certainly there is a pivot to be more diverse, but not quite there as far as inclusion goes.
Yeah, I was just seeing somewhere, some stats that over half of employees are actually looking to, they're actively planning, not just exploring maybe just casually, but planning to actually change jobs because they can, specifically because of the remote work possibility. How do you see that with your clients and as you talk to just practitioners, your peers?
See what specifically?
Just about people wanting to leave their jobs or planning actively to change jobs just because they can right now, because of the remote work situation. How much of that do you see that influencing people's plans in terms of career change or just changing companies?
I think it is influencing everything, but I think what we learned with the current pandemic is people are realizing, you know what, I don't need the 5-day work week. I don't need to work 15 hours a day, other than you and I, Sonia. We probably still have to do that. But we don't need to work those hours. More time with family, more time with friends, more time doing other hobbies, for example. So I think it made them realize the importance of being able to pivot. And you know what? Maybe I don't need to be on site every day. Maybe I can only be on site once or twice a week, which is okay. So I think that's really what you're seeing more than anything. And I think, again, their voice is there now. It's not quite there, but the voice is there for them to speak up and say, you know what, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to do something else.
And do you think that's being heard by employers?
Clearly it is, because a lot of these employers are pivoting and they are adjusting their business model. Some of the larger organizations, maybe they're attempting to push us back into a different directions where they're requiring people to be on site. But I think that strategy is ephemeral. I don't think it's going to work. And we're seeing it again with the Great Resignation. People are just not willing to be in an environment that they don't think is right for them. Mm-hmm. So I think it's what we're seeing now is going to be the new normal, if anything, as far as the workplace goes.
Yeah, we work with a lot of clients who are often asking, what should we do? Should we go hybrid? How much hybrid? How many days? So, it's a big question, right? It's not easy to solve that. And then if people come to the extent that people come to work, in terms of vaccinations, what should we require or not require it? So there's a lot of questions like that. And one of the things that we have said, it may seem pretty simple, but a lot of times the simple solutions are actually work best. We've said, why don't you ask them? What do you see in terms of that? I mean, our organizations, because everybody's stressing about figuring this out. But how many of them do you see? I mean, there's surveys. There's certainly, the surveys have been around for a long time. But how often and how, how much maybe more do you hear that employers are really trying to get the voice of the employees on a more ongoing, regular basis, as they make decisions?
Certainly, if they work with us, we make sure it happens, just quite frankly. But I will give credit to the HR community. I would give credit to the Society of HR Management, who are really pushing these initiatives to have these conversations and to ask the question. I do think it's more prevalent now. I think the questions are being brought up. But I think before anything else, the logical question that needs to be asked is, what does our business need? Does our business need for us to be on site all the time? Is that realistic, right? Or is it just, oh no, that's the way it should be. We have to be in person. We all have to be in suits and in by 9, out by 7 sometimes. So I think having the conversation is occurring. Now, are organizations listening? I would say in some instances, yes, but in a lot of instances, no. I do want to add one important thing. The worst thing you can do is ask the question, but not follow up.
Right.
Do the survey, but not follow up. Do the survey, for example, and not share the data. Those are the biggest mistakes you can make. So it's important to definitely follow up and listen to your employees. Yeah,
no, those are really great points that you make. You know, we so many times we have the same thing when we work with people, and when we first start, you know, doing some surveys or you know, on our platform where people can, it's a social safe environment where people can share, you know, what their ideas are, what their thoughts are, what their experiences are, what the recommendations are, you know, to management, and just, you know, with their peers, kind of having authentic conversations. When we encourage that, they just there is a little bit of a backlash, or there's sometimes people saying, yeah, but we've said it for a long time, and you know, it hasn't been listened to. And I realized, you know, a lot of times employers just have too much input, you know, and they don't know what to do with it. You know, they have all this input that they've gotten, and it's just organizing that, realizing what to do about it, and picking a few things. And to your point, I think the transparency, just sharing, even if what I've found is even sharing with people that, well, we got all this data we're working on, we're trying to figure out, you know, what few things come out of it, or here are a couple of things that came out of it. It's not everything, but it's like a partial answer. I think that, as you know, I've worked in corporations a long time. You've worked with a lot of, you know, those of us who have a lot of experience. It's like we're so used to. It's almost like we have to unlearn some of the things that we used to do that made us successful, because sometimes we want to have a finished, complete answer for these issues that are coming up every day. I mean, HR and ID professionals, my heart goes out to all of them, because there's just so much to worry about these days. Yep. And we used to complain about not getting a seat at the table, but now it's like you have a seat at every table, right? Everybody's worrying about different aspects of this. So, so I think just sharing. What are your thoughts about that? Just sharing with people, you know, more transparently, and being a little bit vulnerable and authentic, and just saying, hey, we haven't figured it all out, but we figured like these couple of things out, and this is where we're going to get started.
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency and being vulnerable is okay. I think we need to see that from our leaders. It's okay if our leaders are saying, I don't know, help me. You know, we go back to that survey example, ask the question, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? What are your solutions? Give them that voice. But I think bringing everybody together and having everybody own the challenge that they're facing, I think is the right way to go. So, you know, I think as leaders, we often feel like we have to have all of the answers. 99% of the time, the answer is already in the room. We just have to ask the right question. But most importantly, and this goes back to inclusion, that creating that psychological safety for employees to be able to speak up, to share their perspective, to feel that they are being heard. I think that's a big cultural component that leaders should start focusing on more and more.
You know, like I was just saying, you know, HR and ID professionals are really stressed these days. Do you have any nuggets for them? Like what have you seen, like successful, those in, you know, HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion business that have come out, really managed their stress as well, and come out successfully moving, you know, their organizations and their own careers, you know, forward as a result of this? Because it's really a big opportunity too, to really finally push HR and ID into the forefront and into being a much more strategic role. That's something that I know the professionals have vied for, you know, for a long time, given the circumstances.
So I always tell ID and E, because I go with I, of course, ID and E professionals and HR professionals, to write 3 things down. The first thing, which we've heard now for many years, is inclusion starts with I. What that means is do what you can do with your abilities. Start with yourself, look at your own mental models, look at what you can change. And are you doing that to the best of your ability? Number 1. Number 2, celebrate small wins. Attending today's webinar is a small win. Having a conversation with an employee and making them feel included is a small win. Even getting an inclusion council started, no matter where you are or what type of industry you're in, is a small win. So celebrate every win, and that's okay. We're always trying to hit that proverbial home run all the time and get the big win right away. That's just not the way it works. And number 3 is, and I have always said this, and Sonia, you've heard me a million times by now, is remind yourself that inclusion is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it goes back to my second point. It's not going to happen overnight. You have to be patient, celebrate those small wins, and look for the bigger picture. And just, be okay with that. Be okay with not really getting the big wins early on.
How do you know when you're there? I think part of it also is, we see a lot of progress and a lot of attention to diversity. I think it's largely because it's easier, right? I mean, you can look at representation numbers. There's a lot of now tools and things that, when we start working with customers, we've defined like 50 key performance indicators for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the few that are, the top few handful of them that are about representation are the ones everybody's got, and everybody's interested in that. But at the end of the day, we know very well, both of us work with organizations that have very diverse population, even diversity, at the leadership level. And yet it's not an environment where everybody feels like they belong. It's not a trusting environment. It's not where everybody feels included necessarily. So how do you know when you're there in terms of measuring inclusion or if you will, some leading indicators of inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you go through the list as a company and ask yourself, are we doing everything that we can do first, just kind of reflecting as an organization? Are we doing everything we can do to make people feel welcome and included? But really, the ultimate answer, honestly, Sonia, is the question, or the answer rather, is in the room. Ask the employees, do you feel included? Ask the employees, do you feel that there is psychological safety? Do you feel welcome? Do you feel that you have to be here? Do you feel that you have to cover and not be able to show your true self? And I think the results of that data, whether it be interviews or even surveys or both, I think will really provide you a good indicator. And honestly, if you look at a lot of the data, I'm not going to get into specific numbers, but it's pretty conclusive. Would you agree? More inclusive organizations are more profitable, are more successful, and are just happier overall. So it's pretty clear, but you have to ask your employees, do they feel included? That's the ultimate question.
No, absolutely. And so in terms of, since I'm a numbers girl, being an engineering at heart, it truly is. I think a lot of this data is known, but I'll just mention it for everybody's benefit, maybe to remind us, because inclusive organizations are known to, the numbers that, always stay with me is like 8 times more likely to do better in terms of, business outcomes, whatever those business outcomes might be, 6 times more likely to be innovative, and 3 times more likely to retain employees, especially millennials, for, a few years, 5 years plus. So these are all good things that we're all after, right? And it's, and we know that over 80% of, all candidates, for example, actually prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion as one of their top priorities for their choice of their employer. So at the end of the day, when you look at it, there's so many important things that we all care about, and we all trying to see how we can improve. And those are, all of them. There's this one lever that we can use, and we can help them. These organizations really succeed much better. So the data is out there, but it's still hard to really figure out how to do it. So let's talk about some of the things that you talked about, like celebrating the small wins. You talked about making time, for example, even with, sometimes talking to like-minded people, maybe webinars like this, roundtables. There's a lot going on now that people can actually participate in. But what good examples have you seen of celebrating the small wins where it really engages and makes everybody feel more welcome and included and belonging?
Yeah, I would just suggest one thing. I wouldn't encourage you to speak to like-minded individuals, I would encourage you to speak to individuals that are not like-minded whatsoever, and to learn and challenge your own mental models, because we're seeing it in politics today. For example, everybody has their own opinion, but sometimes we shut those opinions off because we just want to have that own bias towards ourselves and our feelings and views. So speaking to everybody, learning from everybody, not being afraid to go out there and read or watch something else, for example. But I mentioned earlier, small wins, for example, is having the business case and presenting that to your executive team of why an inclusion council is important, for example, or even the process of building out a survey to share with the employees or ask them questions. That's a small win. Your ratings across the board from employees, any feedback that's open-ended could be small wins. Anything can really be a small win. Understanding and appreciating that as long as the conversation is happening and it's going in a positive direction, that's a good sign for you. Don't give up hope. Just keep on hoping that you kind of get into that positive trend and you'll be fine.
So we have a question actually on the chat, and please, everybody, feel free to put your questions in the chat, but also, your comments and what your experiences are. But this one says, what about retaliation? This is someone who was honest with a supervisor about how they felt. And she says that, then she made my work experience a nightmare. I ended up leaving the organization.
So when the question's about what about retaliation, obviously, let's be clear, I'm not an attorney, not giving legal advice, but that's clearly against the law. That's against your employment rights. So I would encourage you to look at the steps that you feel that you need to remedy that. But I would say, honestly, your win is recognizing that that organization doesn't deserve you. You got up, you left. I hope you're going to do bigger and better things. But I think we do really need to make sure through different conversations with leaders, through training, which I don't believe is a silver bullet for everything, obviously, but through training and understanding what kind of conversations have to occur and what retaliation looks like. Because sometimes retaliation occurs and the individual doesn't even know that they're retaliating. It could be a dirty look. It could be a huff or a puff kind of thing. And maybe they do know they're doing it and they're targeting you. In some cases, they have no clue. So the question really is, how do we get those individuals to become more self-aware? How do we get them to understand and appreciate that everybody has a perspective or maybe feeling a certain way, and kind of engender those conversations? So for the person who asked that question, I see that all the time. I'm very happy that you were able to move on.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with you on the fact that it's it's better to know, right, what you're dealing with. At the end of the day, you spend a lot of your time, in your workplace, whether it's in an office or even at home, in front of a Zoom like this or some kind of a video tool. So it's really the least that you can do is express yourself and at least expect to be heard. And not every employers can't always do everything that is asked of them, by their employees. But at least having the ability to listen to it, to have some feedback to it, those things are really important. I would also say that that is why candidates are prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion when they look for their next employer, right? So I think that that's really important. There's some external ways that you can be aware of, what they're doing. You could ask them questions before. I think asking questions and expressing yourself before you even start employment is really important, right? Saying that those things are important to you, and it doesn't need to be even someone who themselves are necessarily from an underrepresented background. It could be, anyone will benefit from a more inclusive environment, regardless of which group you kind of think that you're in. So I think that's a really good conversation.
And just one more comment. It's very difficult. Logically, the answer is obviously document, talk to your HR professionals who are on site, speak to your leaders. I want to make it very clear to everyone, though, this is a challenge. This is truly a marathon, and it is very difficult. But making sure that you're communicating to those around you as well, that you're not feeling safe, that you feel that you are facing retaliation. And I understand some of this is on a case-by-case basis, but It's difficult, but we have to start opening up the conversation somehow.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. That's a really great point. We have another conversation that here on the chat here. How do you go about having difficult conversations to voice to your employer, supervisor, that you don't feel included? So how do you? So the flip side, how can you have that conversation better? And I do want to stress what you also said. We're not encouraging anybody to leave their employer. We are also not lawyers here. We're not giving any legal advice. But I think, this is just having conversations that this is a difficult conversation, right? Is how do you approach it?
So the question is there a way to do it anonymously initially? Is there a way to create awareness that people may not be feeling included? Is there a way to talk to your HR colleagues and kind of get that message across? Mm-hmm. Or is there a way to educate your company or your leaders with empathy, meaning understanding they may not know what they don't know. So sitting down with them and making it very clear with great humility, hey, look, I want to be a part of this company. I care about the company. Would it be possible for you to include me more? Would it be impossible for you to leverage my skill set, my background, my diversity, right? More and more. I think approaching it with great humility and making it very clear that you're there to help the company, I think will be a big positive for you.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that it's, to some extent, of course, it's always been said that it's difficult to put the onus or the burden, on the underrepresented people to, to be the ones that have to educate. But sometimes, we are in that position. And if you have, the decision is between staying in a job that you don't feel included, you don't feel fully, you can contribute, and then having that difficult conversation. Of course, it's sitting down and trying to do it. I think questions are really, really powerful. When you ask a question, rather than telling people, asking them, did you know how what you said in that meeting might have made someone like me feel? For example, questions are much less confrontational. They don't get people, on the defensive. And so I think that's, what you just recommended. I've seen that work really, really well. But I also want to talk to the allies. A lot of times you are there. I mean, there's always other people involved. There's very, especially in a workplace, whether it's on, again, virtually or in person, a lot of times there's other people involved. And it's really, really powerful when someone else, talks about it, not necessarily publicly again, but at least privately, or afterwards, asking, did you know, I saw so-and-so said something, and in response, or what happened afterwards, did you notice how they might have felt about this? Again, just a question like that, as you said, a lot of times people are unaware. We all have our blind spots. Yep. And that's what really causes the issues.
Or start with this, encourage the organization to create a forum or a medium in which somebody can state something anonymously initially, creating that feedback loop, if you will, where you don't have to necessarily put yourself out there right away. I think that would be beneficial as well.
No, absolutely. We, again, one of the things that we do is this app we have, Culture app, where people can be anonymous. And a lot of times organizations say, we have Slack, we have Microsoft Teams, we have other ways of communicating. But the key issue is, do you have an anonymous way for people to, on an ongoing basis, in a 24/7 basis, some of these suggestion boxes or some ways of, yes, you can send, you can call a phone number and then not hear about it ever again. What happened to your input? Those can even backfire, right? But if you could create a trusting, safe environment, obviously with controls, you want to make sure that while you provide, as an employer, that you provide that, we always also recommend our clients be mindful of their culture. Sometimes a culture is not ready for that right away. It could also backfire if you just, kind of move the organization too fast. But if you're able to do it in a thoughtful way, and maybe initially, invite a few people, and then over time, maybe expand it, maybe set some rules of engagement. The content on some of these kind of platforms or social environments digital environments that you can provide, it's very important to first invite a few people that can have some trusting conversations there and some appropriate conversations. And that doesn't mean not to raise issues, right? But to do so, professionally and in a respectful way. And then when you set that stage and then you open it up little by little, to a larger organization, you can do it in a thoughtful way and in a relatively short period of time, kind of engage the whole organization in having trusting conversations. If people feel they need to go anonymous, I always tell people it's a good sign. It's a good sign that you're getting people that you weren't hearing from finally saying how they really feel, because your culture is set, and I don't know how you feel, but I would say, culture is always set by the lowest common denominator. It's really the outliers, the people that are from underrepresented groups or have some unique needs. How are they feeling about it, right? I mean, 80% of your employees may feel just fine, but what about the 10, 15, 20% that might have special needs or just feel not included? That's what's going to ultimately define your culture.
Yep, agreed.
Let's see, some other nuggets. Do you want to, we have a couple other questions. While I try to read some of them, maybe you can share any other nuggets, and I see some other questions that have come up here.
Yeah, no, certainly. So I think one big thing, and that you've heard me talk about quite often, is try to build your inclusion initiative starting with the I versus starting with the D, or diversity. I think D, E, and I is probably more ubiquitous these days. But the challenge that I have with that philosophically is, if I say DEI, your first objective, if you look at it linearly, is to start focusing on diversity. And what that means is, okay, I'm going to focus on diversity. All right, I have to bring in more diverse people from different backgrounds, different areas. But if I say I, D, and E, and I say I'm going to start with inclusion, the question becomes, inclusive of what? Well, I want to become inclusive of individuals from diverse backgrounds, different thoughts, different religions, different races, so on and so forth. So I think understanding the end game and putting the I front and center, I think, is absolutely key here.
No, absolutely. We have a good question about that, actually. How do you know which comes first? A company is more successful and so everyone feels good and more included? Or is it because they were more inclusive and therefore became more successful?
So I'm reading the question again just to make sure I understand it. How do you know which comes first, more successful, and so everyone feels good and more inclusive? Or is it because they were more inclusive and then got more successful? Yeah, so I would suggest that the more inclusive you are, the more successful you're going to get. Now, this is not binary. This does not mean you're not going to be successful naturally if you're not being inclusive. Obviously, for the past 50 years, we've seen companies be very successful. But they could be more successful. They could have less turnover. They could have more employees step up. They could have probably pivoted within their industry and brought new thought initiatives had they been more inclusive. So the question really is, could they have been more successful? And I think that's kind of the way I would look at it.
Yeah. I think there's a famous thing about, Jack Welch. Now, he was known for a long time for being a great leader. There's some mixed other things that have happened later on, but at the same time, GE was very, very successful under Jack Welch. But he always used to say that, as successful as they were, that the values and really his team being representative of the values that the company had, that the company that he was leading, he wanted them to have. That if they did not, that the numbers didn't matter, that if they even met, all of their sales goals, exceeded some of the objectives or the performance, he routinely made examples of where the more important thing was for people to really adhere to those values. So I think that's one, I guess, it's hard to kind of know exactly the answer to this question. And I know there can be a contrarian view of that maybe it's just, the place is successful, so everybody feels good and feels included. I guess that could be the case, but I think in the case of companies like that, and a great leader that for a long time led GE to its during its golden days, really, when he insisted on that, there must have been a reason. When today, very successful investors like BlackRock and others are insisting on diversity, equity, and inclusion, they must believe, right? I mean, I kind of take my cues from that, especially the investment community, the amount of focus on that. I know these days, SEC has started to require disclosures on human capital management. They just approved the NASDAQ diversity rule on August 6th. There is all kinds of ESG and, especially the focus on the S in ESG for social. There is a focus on corporate social responsibility. So I think these are, signs that people believe and have seen data.
Yeah, but if you look at GE, where are they now? And really, the ultimate question is, if Jack Welch had appreciated thought diversity, if he had not had that, I forgot what the rule was, the bottom third get fired or whatever it was. I don't know.
That's why I said it's been mixed.
Yeah. So, but I mean, again, longevity. If you had more diverse thinkers and you're more encouraging, if you added more equity to those individuals, for example, who were at the bottom, maybe they would have been more successful. Maybe you would have a new CEO to take GE into the next generation. So I think GE was successful, but if they had been more inclusive, I believe certainly they would be even more successful.
No, that's why I said it was mixed.
Yeah,
and I appreciate you pointing that out. I think it's like cycles of human evolution, right? The cycles of business evolution, right? So I think at the time where he insisted on that, where everybody only solely cared about the bottom line, and certainly they were delivering on the bottom line, that he kind of stood out as someone who at that time was really caring about at least the part about values. Now, I agree with you that there was some other policies that have been brought into question, in fact, shown not to be that effective in the longer run, and certainly after he left the helm, and creating a sustainable culture of excellence certainly can only be achieved through the inclusion and having an organization where everybody is fully bringing their best, their whole selves and being the best that they can be. I think the more recent examples of some of the rules and regulations and things that are emerging and investor focus on this is really maybe my best answer to the question about whether it's a success that then people feel included, or is it inclusion that actually brings about the success. I think that a lot of people believe these days, and I've seen data that it's the latter. Let's see if we have some other, I think we have some other questions maybe also coming in here too, is what about remote work? I mean, some people say remote work makes it, it allows actually for more diversity, reduces some of the bias, removes the location barriers and things of that sort. And then some people actually say the opposite of that. So can you be for inclusion but against remote work actually? I think is the way the question is worded. Certainly.
My answer is yes, because I'm inclusive. You can certainly believe that inclusion is possible without remote work. You can be for inclusion and against remote work. That's absolutely okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think ultimately, are we looking at what the business needs are for the organization? Are we seeing if the team has the tools and resources to be successful no matter where they are? And what's the ultimate end game, if you will, for the organization and its employees? But I think what we're going to learn is that remote work is now needed for individuals. It's not just a want, it's a need based on their life circumstances. So I think having empathy and understanding that we're not going to probably go 100% again on site, and that remote work is forever a part of our work environment now, I think figuring out how to adjust to that and welcome that thought would be very helpful.
No, absolutely. And from our own experience, we're like fully remote pretty much, but we also try and take the opportunity once in a while, just from, our own company experience, and I've seen other companies do this, is just have periodic, get-togethers where, maybe once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months or something, because there's just that, it's like, it almost is, and I guess, the psychologists will tell us over time, how this all, what lessons are learned over time. But it just seems early indications are that as long as you have some level of personal connection, some opportunities for that. I was just invited to sit in on a national annual meeting that one of our partners had. And it was really nice to just see everybody in one place. It was just 2 days. We went there, we were all together. And then, everybody went back and they're, they have actually a hybrid situation, but we are remote to them. And I felt like really part of that team, just having the opportunity to be there for a little bit as part of their meeting. So I think those are the opportunities to maybe mix it in and kind of ask your employees and see what's appropriate for your geographic region, how distributed you are, how just the culture of the regions that you operate in. And for bigger companies, it may not be the same answer for all locations either. I think it's very important to kind of listen for that as well. You talked about joint accountability, before and in our conversations too. What do you mean by that? And how can it be created? How does it, actually play out when you try to do joint accountability?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of empathy, a little bit of an open heart and open mind, and a whole lot of communication. And you're going to hear me always say the phrase educate with empathy. And what that means is leaders of the organization need to have an open heart and mind and listen to their employees and ask the right questions and be accountable to those questions and the answers. But at the same time, the employees also have to feel comfortable enough to step up and say, here are some solutions. Here's things that we can do differently. Whether I agree with this or not makes no difference, but here is the number one complaint I hear from CEOs. The employees tell me we need to be more inclusive or more diverse, or we need this or we need that, but they don't tell me how. They stop there. And this is not that the leader should be abdicating responsibility. Clearly, the leader should be getting training, him or herself, or getting any information outside. But I think we have to step up and say, look, here are the changes that we need. We need to be more inclusive. Here are some suggestions. Here's what I'm seeing as an employee in the company, and I'm going to own it too. So the message really in that communication strategy, when you meet with your employees, it needs to be, we all own this. I think we all remember Deloitte's 4 levels, compliance, programmatic, leader-led, and obviously integrated. Well, the only way you can get to that top level of inclusion of integrated is for everybody to own it, from the most junior employee to the most senior employee. That's the only way you'll really achieve joint accountability.
We have, I couldn't agree more with you. And it does, as you've said before, it takes time and it's not overnight. I mean, it is a marathon. We refer to it as ACT. This may be something that's easy to remember. The ACT process, and the A here stands for align. The C stands for connect, and the T stands for transform. In order to have that transformation that we're all looking for, to be much more inclusive, to take even if we are inclusive already, to take it to the next level, we can always do better, right? It's a journey. Is that first you need to start by aligning on what is it we really want to do? Why are we focusing on inclusion and diversity and equity? Let's get a common vision of that. And what specific objectives? We always say focus on 12 months, whatever period you want, but we pick 12 months because it's not too short, it's not too long. And we say, for that first, 12 months, what are your objectives? Are you trying to just become more diverse in your numbers? Are you trying to, have better representation in leadership and decision-making levels? Are you trying to, have better communication paths and have just better ways of, listening to everybody? There's many different things you can come up with. But that alignment about what is it we're trying to do and how does that relate to our overall business objectives, as you've said, it's very important to connect it somehow with business objectives because that's what makes it sustainable. Mm-hmm. Yes, inclusion, diversity, equity are the right things to do. But at the same time, for it to become a priority, the reality is in a business, it's got to be somehow linked with the business objectives because we're all here to deliver to some expectations. So that A for align is really important. But then right after that, we put C for connect, which means connecting everybody, sharing those objectives, sharing what we're trying to do over the 12 months with everyone and asking for their feedback and asking them to actively engage and take actions themselves as well. It could be as easy as, checking on each other, having more communications, asking everybody's opinions more where we're, deciding on the next meeting, what time is more appropriate for everybody, keeping in mind there's working parents, there's different kinds of people. People have a lot of family care responsibilities these days. So to your point, everybody can do something about it, but it's really important to have, what we have always said is have that alignment up front, and then share what that alignment is, what those key objectives are. Ask people's, inputs and feedback to that to create that joint ownership, and then give them ways that they can also participate, take actions. You can't make it too hard for people. Everybody has a job to do. So if you have, an easy environment, where do I go to find information? Where do I go to help out? How can I make my inputs and ideas known, and how can I voice, my ideas? So those kind of things, I think, befall on the company or the organization to provide some, ways for people to do that. You can't just throw it out there and say, just tell me how you feel. People aren't going to just pick up the phone or, blurt out what their ideas are in the middle of a meeting. You do have to provide some of that. So I'm kind of getting down to the nitty gritty, because I know the high level concepts are, everybody gets it at this point because of just everything that's happened over the last 18 months. But sometimes people get stuck in, what can I do specifically? What can I do right after I leave this, for example, this webinar, right? So at that point, I know that you have great ideas and have lots of experience with that. So what are some of the things you want people to take away from this conversation and kind of maybe go out and do?
So I think the first thing is congratulate yourself and take it easy on yourself at the same time, because again, this is a marathon. It's a long process. So going back to celebrating the small wins, but really go through the self-reflection stage. Really look at what you can do yourself to be more inclusive. Look to see what your blind spots possibly could be and how to improve yourself. And make sure that when you see individuals out there making mistakes or saying things that obviously are inappropriate, but may not be inappropriate to them because of their mental models, because of the area they grew up or their background, really educate with empathy. Slow down and explain to them, hey, maybe you shouldn't say this. We look at phrasing, for example. People utilize phrases all the time, but they don't really realize where the phrases come from and how many years they go back. So just slowing down, looking in the mirror, and asking yourself when you go to work tomorrow, whether it's in person or remote, asking, what's that one thing you can do at least over the next 60 days to help your company become more inclusive? Start with one thing, accomplish that, and then move on to the next, and then move on to the next after that.
Yeah, so just think of your own personal contribution, take action, and one step at a time. That's awesome recommendation. Tell us in the next few minutes that we have, just briefly about your book, your upcoming book. What is the title? What's the theme? If you can share, whatever you can share with us. I know that it's coming out in 2022.
Yeah, so it's simply an expanded version of my dissertation while I was at USC, religious workplace discrimination against Muslim women who wear the headscarf or the hijab. What I actually did was I expanded it really to be more global beyond the United States and across various religions. And also to make sure really how to understand the pervasiveness of religious discrimination, because oftentimes that's one that is forgotten. Obviously, there's all types of discrimination, but religious discrimination specifically is sometimes tricky because religions change, people change. And here's a big one. What if you don't have a religion? But you're working in a company that has a lot of religious people. Are you still feeling included? Are you still feeling welcomed? So there's going to be a series of case studies, real case studies, true stories. Obviously, it's going to be fictional characters in them, but they're going to be real stories to kind of elucidate what individuals are experiencing in the workplace now and some remedies and how to handle that going forward.
Wow, I can't wait. That's gonna be it's not, I haven't seen anything else like it that is specific like that. Again, conceptually, there's some philosophical books or, writings like that, but I haven't seen one, just like you described, with some practical, especially in a workplace business environment. Mm-hmm. We have a good question that actually really relates to that. And it says, since I accepted the D&I lead at my organization, I often receive feedback from employees that D&I is all about race and gender. how do I reinforce all the different dimensions that make up D&I? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, so I'd have to learn a little bit more about what steps have already been taken, but I think making sure that everybody's utilizing the same terminology and same expectations. So utilizing some form of communication to really make it clear what all the dimensions of inclusion, what that means, and examples of that, and make it very clear. We call that making it sticky. So whether you have it in your coffee room or on your website, wherever it may be. So for people to really appreciate all the dimensions and actually give the behavior of what it would look like as an example. So communicate. That's the name of the game. And I just want to make one thing clear to everybody. You're not going to win 100% of the individuals over. That's just the reality. We're human. We all change. We all shift. Try to, get about 80% of the individuals that to really buy in to the best of your ability, but never forget, also welcome those individuals or those naysayers, welcome them to the table as well and hear their opinions.
That is such a great point. We often get this question because typically when people, especially if they're in these roles of, champions or leads or, key stakeholders, at some point they will say, yeah, but there's naysayers, they come up and they confront me and they say these things. And we always say, well, but inclusion is about including them too, right? They're part of that, right? And you can only win them over long term. You can't do it in the short term. There's nothing you're going to tell a person to change their mind in a minute. If anything, you can just make matters worse. The only thing I always say to people is ask them to keep an open mind. Ask them to give you a chance. Ask them to just, keep asking the hard questions. Be specific about their hard questions, not just, oh, I don't believe in this, or it's never worked. It'll always be the same. I mean, these general comments there's no answer to them. But if there's something specific that they see, I think it should be encouraged as well, because the naysayers are the ones that make us better, the ones that challenge us. So I think that's really important. Any other comments on that?
No, I'm going to be redundant here to the individual who asked that question and the comment with you, Sonia. Educate with empathy. Don't get mad. Naysayers are going to exist. Just understand sometimes they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. Because of the topic of your book, I also meant to ask you this. I mean, we don't get political on these webinar series, and this is not intended as a political question, but how do you see what's happening in Afghanistan from the perspective of IDE?
Yeah, well, I have to, just to be very clear, what is happening in Afghanistan is completely antithetical to what the Muslim religion is altogether. I feel like I have to make sure that's very clear. But in reality, what we're learning here is that it's the opposite effect. You're forcing people to dress a certain way, act a certain way based on what they feel is correct. They, meaning the government or the current leaders of that specific country. But forcing people have their own perspectives of religion. They want to wear what they want to wear. They may have their own philosophical views of religion. Allowing them to be included and allowing them to be who they are is key. That's not happening at all, clearly, and it's a huge disappointment. I mean, you see, that's one extreme. You see other extremes where you can't be religious at all in some countries, right? You can't wear anything that represents any religion. And now you're seeing somebody or a group forcing you to be religious, if you will. It's horrible. It's a horrible experience. And I know it's very difficult, but hopefully we can make some positive changes that will help influence that region somehow.
No, I love the way that you put it, and the perspective that in either direction, it's not right to force people and not let them be who they are. I know, for example, in some European countries, women have been banned from wearing the hijab. And that's not right either, because some of them have said, we really believe in this, really want to do this. This is actually, I'm not being forced to do it. I actually want to do it myself. There's many Muslim American women who choose to do that. And that should be as much, welcome and okay with anyone as the opposite. So I think that's really a great point to keep in mind. We are, any other questions? Let me make sure that there's other ones. Okay, I think we've maybe, if we haven't answered any, we are always available. I know both Ed and I. We have the last couple of minutes. I do want to point out that we do have a lot of opportunities for thought leadership and for talking about these kind of topics. So I want to quickly put up this one slide that is about just the different opportunities around thought leadership that we try and facilitate. We have this webinar series, of course. You can always go to ouroffice.io/events. Within the next couple of days, you'll see this recording actually posted there. With this date, you'll clearly see that, and you'll clearly see other upcoming webinars. We frequently speak about these topics. We have a Future of Work community with roundtable series once a month as well. This is specifically for HR and D&I professionals. We have blog pieces very often. We have some ebooks and things that we've written that we can also share with those who are interested. You see some opportunities here. You can always reach out to us at DEI at our office.io, and we'll be happy to answer any other questions. So with that, I'm going to ask you for a few parting words here, Ed, of where you want to leave this conversation and putting the I in front. I really actually do like ID. I just have to get used to it.
Just remember the end game is inclusion. That those are my parting words, and that it's a long project, if you will. It's going to take some time. Just be patient with yourself. And for those of you who are dealing with this on a daily basis or struggling with your organizations to become more inclusive, know that we're here to support you. There are a lot of groups and organizations, including our office, including Kaizen, to support you and help you out, even if it's just a question or if you need some guidance. But just be patient, and hopefully this will all work out for everybody, where we all can feel included no matter who we are.
No, I really, really appreciate that. I guess I'll just add that, first of all, I get asked a lot about whether or not this is just a phase. Maybe next year in 2022, people's attention is going to turn away again from DEI. I'm sure you hear this too, right? I mean, the idea of diversity and inclusion has been around for, and equity especially, has been around for many, many decades. People have fought, and lives have been lost, and all kinds of events and proclamations and laws and things have been passed, but yet we're not there. So I think it's an understandable concern, but I will say that personally, this is not just wishful thinking. I really see signs that there is no turning back. What you said, Ed, is so important, that the workforce has changed. There has been a shift in employee expectations, and we're never going back. That's just not, people aren't going to go back and say, oh, I just forgot the last. People have actually seen in their lives why having an inclusive workplace really matters. Those employees who were cared for by their organizations while sitting at home, their needs were met, people were asking them, versus those who were just left to their own devices to kind of figure it out. I think people see those things. The best talent is going to go there. And the millennials and Gen Zers are more and more diverse than ever. I mean, they're already more than 50% diverse. And by 2025, that's going to be 75% of the workforce. So those are key reasons. The other key reason is investor community, investors and customers. There is regulations. Really, if you had asked me just a few years ago, since I sit on company boards, that SEC would take the actions they've taken, that they would have approved the NASDAQ rule. Frankly, I would have been surprised. That I would have been hopeful, but still surprised that they would have actually approved these sorts of things. So, and major trading houses have indexes, diversity, equity, inclusion indexes. So there's no going back. So you must get to work. If you're not doing it, if your organization is not doing it, there's no company. My second message is no organization, too small, too early, too busy, too little budget. All of those things can be solved with intention. So that's where I would leave it. And I thank you. Some people are saying thank you. We thank you also for listening and tuning in to us. Please feel free to share the recording if anybody else wants to listen to it later on. I can't thank you enough, Ed. It's a pleasure and an honor to be a colleague and a friend, and I look forward to many more conversations.
Thank you. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.